Why would a husband walk out without a single word after years of marriage? I thought admitting what I did was brave, honest, even. It was supposed to be a stupid joke between friends. But when I told him I'd kissed his best friend on a dare, he didn't shout, didn't cry. He just left, and that silence ruined me more than any fight could. I'm Alara Venn, 33, and I guess you could say I ruined my marriage trying to be funny. It started as a stupid dare, a party game I thought no one would remember. I always liked being the one who went too far, the one who made people laugh even when they shouldn't. Jonah, my husband, used to call it my dangerous charm. He said it with a smile back then, but lately, he'd stopped smiling at anything I did. We've been married 8 years. He's calm, quiet, the kind of man who plans everything. Grocery lists, vacations, even how to argue. I used to find that comforting. Now it just felt like being suffocated by reason. I told myself he needed to loosen up, to stop taking life so seriously. I guess that's how I justified what happened. It was supposed to be harmless. Just a kiss on a dare, his best friend, a crowded room full of laughter. I didn't mean for it to mean anything. But when Jonah's face fell, when the laughter died and he said nothing at all, that silence followed me home like a shadow. I thought he'd yell, slam doors, demand explanations. He didn't. He just stopped talking. And somehow, that silence hurt worse than anything he could have said. Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It happened at our house on a Saturday night. One of those casual dinners that started with good intentions and too much wine. Jonah had grilled outside, proud of his perfect timing, and I decorated the table with candles like we were hosting something fancy. Darren, his best friend, came early, as he always did, with a bottle of cheap red and his usual grin. He'd been around since college, loud and funny, the kind of man who filled every silence Jonah left empty. By the time Tessa and her boyfriend arrived, the kitchen was warm with laughter. Music played from my phone, plates clattered, and someone suggested a game. Truth or dare, old school style. It was supposed to be harmless. I loved being the bold one, the unpredictable one. Jonah looked wary but didn't stop it. I could tell he hated these games, but he just said, "Don't take it too far." The first few rounds were silly. Someone dared Tessa to drink from a flower vase. Someone made Darren eat a spoonful of mustard. We were laughing, loud and unguarded, the kind of laughter that hides boredom. Then Tessa looked at me with that mischievous grin and said, "Alara, truth or dare?" I said, "Dare, of course." I always did. She laughed and said, "Kiss someone who isn't your husband." The room went still for half a second, just enough for the tension to bloom. I looked at Jonah. He didn't laugh, didn't blink, just watched. Darren raised his eyebrows and said, "It's just a game, right?" I smiled like I wasn't nervous and said, "Sure." I leaned forward and kissed him. It was quick, just a few seconds, but too long for what it should have been. Everyone cheered, awkwardly at first, then louder when I forced a laugh. My face burned, not from guilt but from adrenaline. Jonah sat there, his expression unreadable, his hand tightening around his glass. After that, the game broke apart. The mood shifted. People made excuses to leave early. Darren gave Jonah a pat on the shoulder and muttered something about seeing him at work. I pretended to clean up, hoping Jonah would say something, anything, but he didn't. When the last guest left, I closed the door and turned to him. He was standing by the sink, staring at nothing. I tried to make it sound light. I said, "You know it was just a dare." He said, "You didn't have to do it." I said, "It was a joke. Everyone was laughing." He looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "Not everyone." I felt anger rise, not at what I'd done, but at how calm he was. I said he was overreacting, that normal couples knew how to have fun. He said, "Then maybe we're not normal." He put the glasses in the sink, turned off the light, and walked past me toward the door. I asked where he was going. He said, "For air." The door closed gently, not slammed, not dramatic, just soft and final. I stood there, still holding a half-empty wine glass, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I told myself he'd cool off, that we'd laugh about it later. I even texted Tessa. "He's mad. Guess he doesn't get jokes anymore." She replied with a laughing emoji and said, "He'll come around." When he came back an hour later, he didn't say a word. He went upstairs, took a shower, and went to bed. I followed him, tried to start something normal, asked if he wanted to talk. He said he was tired. I lay next to him in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The silence between us felt like an ocean. I told myself he just needed time, that he was being dramatic, that he'd forget about it. I didn't know that the silence wasn't confusion, it was decision. The next morning, I woke up early and made breakfast, a peace offering. He came downstairs, hair still damp, wearing that same calm face that made me feel small. I said good morning. He said it back, flat. I tried to joke, asked if he'd forgiven me for our silly little party. He said, "It's your party." I laughed, said he was still mad. He didn't look up. He said, "You humiliated me in front of my oldest friend." I said, "It was just a dare, Jonah. You act like I cheated." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said quietly, "You think there's a difference." I couldn't think of an answer, so I just picked up my coffee cup, pretending I didn't care. He finished his breakfast in silence, put his plate in the sink, and left for work without another word. The house felt bigger after he was gone, empty but heavy, like it remembered everything I wanted to forget. I texted Darren later, half out of guilt, half curiosity. I said, "He's mad." "Think I should apologize?" Darren replied, "He'll get over it. It's not like it meant anything." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to think Jonah's quiet was just sulking, that soon he'd go back to his careful routines and forgive me by default. But that night, when he came home, he didn't kiss me hello. He didn't even sit near me. He went straight upstairs, and I heard the faint click of the guest room door closing. That sound, small, deliberate, final, made me shiver. I told myself he just needed space. I poured another glass of wine and texted Tessa again. "He's sleeping in the guest room." "Dramatic, right?" She wrote back, "He's hurt. Give him time." I laughed and sent back, "He's always quiet when he's mad. That's his thing." But deep down, even as I laughed, I knew something had shifted. Jonah's silence wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder, like he'd already decided to live without needing to tell me. I sat there, alone in the kitchen, when my phone buzzed again. "Darren." "You sure he's okay?" I typed back, "He'll calm down. He always does." And then, from upstairs, the sound of a door clicking shut again. The same quiet sound that now felt like a warning. The next few days blurred together. Jonah stayed polite, distant, mechanical. He went to work, came home, ate dinner in silence. Every time I tried to talk about what happened, he said, "There's nothing to talk about." That sentence became a wall between us. I tried to act like things were normal. I posted a photo from the dinner party, everyone smiling, glasses raised. I captioned it, "Good friends, bad ideas." It got plenty of likes. For a while, that attention felt like proof that I wasn't the villain here. But by the next morning, I noticed a comment. "That dare was wild, Alara." Then another. "Poor Jonah, he looks so done." My stomach sank. When I checked Jonah's page, I saw he'd deactivated his account. I told myself it didn't matter, that he never cared about social media anyway. But I caught him that evening, scrolling through something on his phone, face tight. When I asked, he said, "Just catching up on what everyone's laughing about." I tried to play it off. I said, "People take jokes too seriously." He said, They only laugh when someone else pays the price. Then he got up and left the room. Later that night, while he showered, I looked at his phone on the nightstand. I shouldn't have, but I did. There were messages from Darren, short, careful ones. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Tell Alara I'm sorry. Another one said, let's talk man to man when you're ready. Jonah hadn't replied. I put the phone back and went downstairs, pacing. I told myself Darren was just trying to fix things, that it didn't mean anything, but it didn't feel like nothing anymore. 2 days later, at the supermarket, I ran into Tessa. She looked uncomfortable, like she didn't want to be seen with me. She said quietly, people are talking. I asked, about what? She said, about the dare, about you and Darren. Someone posted a clip. My heart dropped. She said it wasn't long, just a few seconds, but enough to show me leaning in. It looks bad, she said. You should talk to Jonah before someone else does. When I got home, Jonah's car was already in the driveway. Inside, he was at the table with his laptop open, papers spread out. Neat, organized, precise. I tried to make light of it, said, "You're working late?" He said, "I'm just sorting a few things." I asked what things. He said, "Household stuff." I laughed nervously, asked if he was planning to leave. He said, "No, I'm planning to breathe." That line confused me. I told him I didn't understand. He said, "You don't have to. You never did." He closed the laptop, stood up, and walked past me. I followed him down the hall, asking if he'd seen the video. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and said, "Yes." I said, "It doesn't mean anything." He said, "You keep saying that like it'll make it true." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the video, about people whispering behind my back. I imagined Darren watching it, maybe laughing, maybe regretting it. I texted him, asking if he'd seen it. He replied, "Yeah, it's bad. Maybe I should apologize to him." I typed back, "Don't. He'll calm down." Then I deleted it, typed again. "It was my idea. I'll handle it." The next morning, I told Jonah I wanted to talk. He said, "Go ahead." I said I wanted to be honest, that I knew the video looked bad, but it wasn't as deep as people made it seem. He said, "You kissed him." I said, "On a dare." He said, "That's still a choice." I tried to make him understand. I said I just wanted to feel fun again, to not feel invisible. He said quietly, "So you needed an audience for that?" I didn't have an answer. He walked away. Later that day, Callie called, my sister. She said she'd seen the clip. She tried to sound supportive, said, "You probably didn't mean it, but Jonah looks really hurt." I said he was being dramatic. She said, "He's humiliated." I said, "Everyone's acting like I cheated." She went quiet, then said, "You didn't." Her tone made me defensive. I told her she was supposed to be on my side. She said, "I am, but maybe you should be on yours too, the honest one." I hung up. That night, Jonah came home later than usual. He looked composed, calm, like he'd already cried somewhere private. I asked where he'd been. He said, "Out." I said, "With who?" He said, "Does it matter?" I said, "Yes." He said, "No." He went to the guest room again, closing the door gently. I stood outside, debating whether to knock. I didn't. The next morning, he made breakfast for Lydia before school. I joined them, trying to look cheerful. She asked if we were still having Darren over for movie night. Jonah said, "Not anymore." She asked why. He said, "Some games stopped being funny." I tried to laugh, said he was being dramatic in front of her. He didn't even look at me. After he dropped her off, I noticed something new on the counter. A small blue folder labeled budget. Inside were bills, receipts, and a list of monthly payments. It wasn't like Jonah to leave something half open. I looked closer. At the bottom, a sticky note said, "Downtown 10:15. It didn't mean much to me then. I figured it was a work thing. But the handwriting was different, sharper, colder. Like every letter was deliberate. When he came home that night, I asked what it meant. He said, "Just something I'm handling." I said, "You mean us?" He said, "If that's how you want to see it." I told him he couldn't just shut down. He said, "You taught me how." Then he walked away again, leaving the blue folder exactly where it was. That evening, I went to pour myself a drink, but my hands were shaking. I told myself I hadn't done anything wrong. But the truth was, I didn't know how to feel right anymore. When I sat on the couch later, my phone buzzed, a text from Tessa. "You might want to check Jonah's story." My heart raced as I opened it. It was blank, just a black screen with one line of text. Sometimes silence is the only answer. The moment I read it, I heard it again. The soft click of the guest room door upstairs. The quietest sound in the house and somehow the loudest. By the next week, everything felt off balance. Jonah still went through his routines. Coffee at 7, work by 8, home by 6, but he'd stopped existing with me. We shared space, not life. I tried to make things normal again, cooking dinners, talking about TV shows, pretending the air wasn't thick between us. He'd nod, say, "Sure," or "Fine," without looking up from his laptop. When I told him I couldn't stand this silence, he said, "You built it." That one line cut more than any argument could. That Friday, Darren called. His voice was low, uneasy. He said he wanted to talk in person, to clear things up. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe near his office. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. Dark circles, nervous tapping. He said Jonah had confronted him, not with shouting, but with calm questions. He said Jonah just listened, thanked him for being honest, and left. I froze. I asked what Jonah knew. Darren said, "Everything." My stomach dropped. I said, "There's nothing to know." He gave me a tired look and said, "You told him you just tried me. That's worse." I said it was a joke. He said, "You don't joke like that about friends." I left before he could say anything else. My reflection in the cafe window looked like a stranger, someone who thought being bold meant being free. When I got home, Jonah's car was already in the driveway. He was on the porch, reading something on his phone. I asked if he'd talked to Darren. He said yes. I said, "And?" He said, "You shouldn't have made him part of it." I laughed awkwardly, said, "So you're blaming me for his choices now?" He said, "I'm not blaming you, I'm defining you." Then he went inside. That night, I decided to take control. I told myself honesty would fix things. He couldn't keep punishing me for a kiss. If I admitted everything, maybe he'd finally forgive me. The next morning, I made him coffee and sat across the table. I said I needed to tell him something, that I wanted to be honest, that I'd kissed Darren because I was dared to, yes, but also because I was curious. I said I wanted to see if I could still make someone want me. Jonah didn't move. His eyes didn't even flicker. I said, "You're not saying anything." He said, "What do you want me to say?" I told him to yell, to call me names, to get angry. He said, "You don't get to choose the kind of pain you cause." I started crying then, more from frustration than guilt. I said, "I told you the truth. Doesn't that mean something?" He said, "Yes. It means you waited until it couldn't fix anything." I reached across the table, tried to touch his hand. He pulled it back slowly, carefully, like even contact was too heavy now. He stood up, went upstairs, and came down 15 minutes later dressed for work. Before he left, he said quietly, "You always said I don't react. You were wrong." Then he picked up his keys and walked out. I stood there, stunned, trying to understand what that meant. An hour later, I got a text from Tessa. "Someone recorded you at Jonah's office. It's already going around." My chest tightened. I didn't remember being recorded. Then I realized, last week, the day I went to his office to talk. I'd raised my voice, begged him to listen. He'd walked past me, silent, and I'd shouted after him. Someone must have caught it. When I opened social media, there it was, a short clip of me calling after him in the hallway. The caption said, "She cheated," and he didn't say a word. Thousands of views already. I scrolled through the comments. Serves her right. Imagine embarrassing yourself like that. His silence is king. I threw my phone on the couch, shaking. When Jonah came home that evening, I was waiting. I said, "You saw it, didn't you?" He said, "Of course." I said, "Do you care that everyone's judging me?" He said, "I cared before you gave them permission." I told him he could stop acting superior, that he was embarrassing me too by saying nothing. He said, "Your words did enough." He went to the guest room again, and this time I heard the lock click. It was the softest sound in the world, but it made me feel trapped. The next day, Callie showed up uninvited. She said she'd seen the video and that I needed to apologize publicly. I said, "To who?" "The internet." She said, "To Jonah." I said, "He's not even talking to me." She said, "That's the point." I told her Jonah wasn't perfect either. She said, "He doesn't have to be perfect to not deserve this." I yelled at her to leave. She looked at me for a long second, then said, "You're scared because silence means you don't control the story anymore." And then she left. That night, I tried to talk to Jonah again. I told him we could start over, that people make mistakes. He said, "This isn't a mistake, it's a choice with a price." I asked if he still loved me. He said, "Love and respect can't live in the same house once one leaves." I followed him as he walked upstairs, begging him to tell me what to do. He said, "Stop trying to manage guilt like it's PR." When the guest room door closed this time, it didn't sound like a door anymore. It sounded like a sentence ending. I sat on the floor outside, listening to the silence on the other side. A few minutes later, I heard something new. Faint, mechanical, steady. The printer. Pages feeding through, one after another. I stood up and called his name. No answer. Then I heard a drawer close, the squeak of a folder opening, and the click of a pen cap. That small, calm rhythm, print, close, right, chilled me more than shouting ever could. I went back downstairs, poured a drink with shaking hands, and told myself it was fine, that he was just organizing bills, papers, anything but what I feared. But when I glanced toward the stairwell, I saw the faint light under the guest room door. The glow of the printer still running, steady and unstoppable. And that's when it hit me. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was planning. The following week, everything began to unravel in public. I used to think humiliation was loud, shouting, crying, chaos. But it can also be quiet, like whispers that follow you everywhere. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was dropping Lydia off at school when one of the other parents, a woman named Claire, gave me a tight smile. She said, "Rough week?" I forced a laugh, pretending I didn't understand. Then she said softly, "My husband works with Jonah. He says he's been calm, too calm." She gave me that pitying look people save for tragedies they can't name. When I came home, Jonah's car was gone, but his laptop was open on the kitchen counter. Normally, he'd never leave it unattended. On the screen was a spreadsheet, color-coded, neat. Columns labeled expenses, household assets, accounts. My heart raced as I scrolled down. Every transaction had a note beside it. Confirmed, transfer arranged, duplicate saved. I closed it fast, terrified of what else I'd find. That afternoon, I went to see my sister Callie. I needed someone on my side. She opened the door and said, "You look awful." I said, "Thanks." She sighed, let me in, and poured coffee. I told her Jonah was shutting down, maybe planning something. She said, "What did you expect?" I told her I didn't cheat, not really, that it was a stupid dare gone wrong. She said, "You keep saying dare like it's a shield." I said Jonah was making me feel like a criminal. She said, "Maybe he's protecting himself." I started crying then, real tears this time. I said I'd lost control of everything. She said quietly, You never had control. You just had attention. When I got home, Jonah was sitting in the living room with his mother, Martha. My chest tightened. Martha had always been polite to me, never warm. She stood when I walked in, but didn't smile. She said, "We were talking about Lydia." I said, "About what?" Jonah said, "Her routine, mostly. How we'll manage things." The word stung. We'll manage, like he was planning a future that didn't include me. Martha looked straight at me. "You've embarrassed him," she said simply. "But more than that, you've changed him. Do you realize what it means when a man stops defending himself?" I said she didn't know the whole story. She said, "I don't have to. I can see the result." I told her this was between me and Jonah. She said, "Not when there's a child who notices everything." Jonah didn't say a word through any of it. He just sat there, hands folded, watching like an observer in his own home. When Martha left, I turned on him. I said, "You're letting everyone judge me. You haven't defended me once." He said, "You defended yourself enough for both of us." I said, "You think silence makes you better?" He said, "No, it just makes me free." I didn't know how to respond. I went upstairs and slammed the door. Later that evening, Lydia came into my room, holding one of her drawings, a picture of 3 stick figures. One stood apart from the others. I asked what it was. She said, "That's Daddy and me. You're far away because you said you were sorry." It felt like a punch to the chest. I asked who told her that. She said, "Nobody. You said it yourself when you cried last night." I didn't even remember saying it out loud. At dinner, I tried again. I told Jonah we could fix this, that it was just a bad chapter. He said, "Chapters end." I said, "So what, you just give up?" He said, "You did first." He stood, cleared his plate and went into the guest room. I followed, shouting through the door that he was being cruel, that I was trying. He said from the other side, "You're trying to rewrite what already happened." Then came the sound, the familiar soft hum of the printer again. I pressed my ear to the door. No yelling, no anger, just that low, steady sound of paper sliding out, one sheet at a time. The next morning, I found a new folder on the counter labeled Household, clear copy. Inside were bills, a checklist, and a blank page at the end. I didn't understand what it meant, but the name scared me. That afternoon, I went to Lydia's school early and waited outside her classroom. When she came out, she asked if Daddy would still come to her play on Friday. I said, "Of course." She said, "He said maybe." Then she looked up at me and asked, "Mom, did you hurt his friend?" My throat closed. I asked where she heard that. She said, "Grandma said adults can break trust. Did you break it?" I forced a smile, said it was complicated. She frowned. "That means yes." When we got home, Jonah was in the garage. He was packing a small box, files, a framed photo, a watch. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Just organizing." I said, "It looks like you're leaving." He said, "Maybe for a while." I reached for him, desperate. "You can't just walk out." He said, "I'm not walking out, I'm walking right." The calm in his voice was unbearable. I started shouting that he was making a mistake, that we were fine before all this. He said, "We were never fine." I was just quiet. He set the box down, turned, and looked at me. "You don't understand silence," he said. "You think it's weakness. It's actually the sound of me being done." I felt my knees go weak. That night, he slept in the guest room again. I couldn't rest. Around midnight, I crept downstairs and saw light leaking under the door. I opened it just enough to see him sitting at the desk, papers spread, folders labeled custody, finances, assets. He wasn't angry, just focused. I backed away quietly, heart pounding. When he came into the kitchen the next morning, I was waiting. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I told you I'd handle it properly." I said, "What does that mean?" He looked at me, his expression calm but final. "You'll find out soon." He picked up his keys, checked his watch, and said, You should take Lydia to your sister's this weekend. Then he walked out. As the door closed behind him, I saw a flash on his phone screen before it went dark. A reminder, downtown 10:15. The quiet click of the lock felt heavier than any shout. That was the moment I finally believed him. He wasn't angry. He was finished. The days after that felt unreal, like I was living in a house that no longer belonged to me. Jonah didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't even avoid me. He was just efficient, calm to the point of cruelty. Every movement had purpose, sorting mail, checking bills, wiping down counters. It was like he was preparing the world to exist without me in it. I kept trying to interrupt his rhythm. I'd ask if we could talk, if we could start therapy, if he'd at least tell me what handling it properly meant. He'd just say, "Not now," or "You'll see soon." He still took care of Lydia like nothing was wrong. Packed her lunch, brushed her hair, read her bedtime stories. I'd stand in the doorway, watching them, feeling like a ghost in my own home. One night, after she fell asleep, I told him I missed him. He said, "You miss what I used to let you do." That stung. I said, "You're twisting everything." He said, "You already did that." He turned back to his laptop and started typing. I noticed the same folders again. Finances, custody, household, and now a new one. Personal. I asked what that was. He said, "Records." I said, "Of what?" He said, "Behavior." My chest went cold. I asked if he was spying on me. He said, "No, I'm documenting." He closed the laptop and left it on the counter like an exclamation mark. The next morning, I called Callie. I told her Jonah was acting like a stranger, like he'd already made up his mind. She said softly, "He probably has." I said, "He wouldn't do anything extreme." She said, "You mean legal?" I didn't answer. That afternoon, I came home early and found him in the guest room again. Papers were spread out neatly on the bed, piles labeled with sticky notes. One said household items, another said vehicle titles. Another, in small, careful handwriting, said Lydia, schedule. He looked up when he saw me. "You shouldn't be in here," he said. I said, "It's my house too." He said, "Exactly. For now." I told him he couldn't just act like the judge and jury. He said, "I'm not acting. I'm documenting." I wanted to scream. I said, "You think this is justice? It's cruelty." He said, "No, it's consequence." He gathered the papers and stacked them into a single folder, perfectly squared, as if that small order could contain all the chaos between us. That evening, Lydia asked if Daddy was mad at me. I told her no, we were just figuring things out. He said we're learning about honesty. Her words stung more than she knew. When she went to bed, I followed Jonah into the kitchen. I said, "You can't take her from me." He said, "No one said that." I said, "Then what are you planning?" He said, "To finish this properly." I shouted that he was being manipulative, that he was punishing me by pretending to be calm. He looked at me, almost pitying, and said, "You still think everything is performance. This is real, Ilara." The sound of my name from his mouth felt unfamiliar, too formal, like I'd been downgraded from wife to acquaintance. The next day, I drove to his office. His co-workers avoided my eyes when I walked in. One of them whispered something and turned away. Jonah saw me and walked out into the hallway. I said, "We need to talk." He said, "Not here." I said, "Then where?" He said, "You'll know soon." I followed him outside, still demanding answers, but he only said, "Stop trying to control the ending." I went home shaking. The silence of the house felt heavy. On the counter, there was a note in his handwriting. "Lydia will stay with me tomorrow. Don't wait up." I read it 5 times, trying to decide if it was a threat or a plan. That night, I called Tessa. She said she'd heard from Darren. Apparently, Jonah had spoken to him again, calmly, and told him everything was being handled. Darren told her he'd never seen Jonah so composed. Like a man signing off on a chapter, she said. I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me jump. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the stairs, the faint tap of rain against the window. In the morning, Jonah came downstairs, wearing a dark jacket I hadn't seen in months. He poured coffee and checked his phone. His calmness scared me more than rage ever could. I said, Jonah, please, don't do this. He said, do what? I said, whatever you're planning. He said, I'm planning peace. He looked up, his face unreadable. You said you wanted honesty, so here it is. I can't live like this anymore, but I won't destroy you. I'll do it properly. The way he said properly made me feel sick. I said, you're making a mistake. He said, you already did. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door. I ran after him, begging him to stay, to talk, to fight. Anything but this cold silence. He turned back for one brief second and said, fighting means there's still hope. There isn't. He stepped outside. The morning light made him look like someone I didn't know anymore. Tall, steady, resolved. He walked to his car, got in, and drove away without looking back. I stood in the doorway, the word properly echoing in my head like a curse. Inside, the house was too still. I noticed the guest room door was open for the first time in weeks. On the desk sat a single envelope, unsealed. I hesitated before picking it up. Inside were plain sheets of paper, checklists, copies of receipts, and at the bottom, a calendar reminder printed in bold, downtown 10:15, final step. My hands trembled. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it was about me. When I looked out the window again, the driveway was empty. That was when I finally realized the quiet wasn't temporary anymore. It was the prelude to something permanent. The next morning, I was called to meet him downtown. I thought he wanted to talk. Instead, he stood outside the courthouse, calm and distant, a folder in his hand. A man beside him stepped forward and gave me an envelope. Petition for divorce and temporary custody orders. My name, his, Lydia's. All printed, final. I asked why he couldn't at least say something. He said, I already did. You just never listened. Then he turned and walked inside. The courthouse doors shut behind him, heavy and certain, and for the first time, silence truly sounded like goodbye. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.